ours is, of course, Philip is based in Melbourne, Australia. Our administration is based out of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and it really highlights the global nature of the Sea Shepherd model, where we really are a movement that is international. So if you're joining us at an odd hour, thank you so much for making the time. I wanted to start talking a little bit about why I joined Sea Shepherd all these years ago. I was 18 years old when I submitted an application, and for the past 17 years, I've been sailing the seven seas with passionate and compassionate Sea Shepherd crews, measuring their success by the number of lives that they save and by the number of criminal operations they shut down. And like many of you joining us tonight, it was really whaling that got me involved in Sea Shepherd. Since I was a 14-year-old kid, whaling was the most important environmental issue for me. No other environmental issue was of greater importance. This was a deeply felt sentiment that I had since I was a 14-year-old kid and I saw a picture of a dead whale being pulled up the slipway of an 8,000-ton factory whaling ship down in the Antarctic. And that feeling was really amplified when I saw the killing of whales for myself in 10 years of campaigns down in the Southern Ocean chasing Japanese whaling ships. But while Sea Shepherd spent 10 years chasing Japanese whaling vessels down in the Antarctic around the frozen continent, the remaining seven seas were under siege. And that's why Caleb Roberts, a professor of marine sciences at the University of York, he really describes whaling as the first truly global fishing industry. In the late 1700s, early 1800s, whalers from the Americas, from the Basque Country, from the Netherlands, systematically moved from ocean to ocean, driving whale species to the brink of extinction. And with the advent of steam and then diesel technology, with the advent of the explosive tipped whaling harpoon, and so successful were they at driving these whale species to the brink of extinction that they were able to chase these whales all the way down to the bottom of the world, down to the Antarctic. Because of how close we were to losing the great whales in the 1980s, the international community got together and passed a global moratorium on commercial whaling. And although a small handful of countries continue to whale in defiance of this moratorium, the reality is that the majority of whale populations are recovering. And the same simply cannot be said for sharks, for sea turtles, for tuna, and for other marine wildlife. Out of the populations or the species of sharks around the world, 1/3 of shark species are endangered. In the Atlantic, shark populations have fallen by 90% in just the past 30 years. And that's because of the global fishing industry. It's because of deliberate targeting of these sharks for their fins or for shark liver oil, and also because sharks are dying as bycatch in the industrial fisheries. Out of the 7 species of sea turtles, 6 of these 7 species of sea turtles are either threatened or endangered. And yet there isn't a single fishery in the world that deliberately targets sea turtles. Sea turtles are nearing extinction because of bycatch in the industrial fishing industry. And that's why the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has sounded alarms. And they believe that 90% of the world's fisheries are either fully exploited or overexploited. If these trends continue, then by 2050, all the major fisheries of predatory fish will be gone. And around the same time, there will be more plastic in the world's ocean by weight than by fish. So we're in the middle of this 6th great extinction in ecological history, the 6th in a line of 5 massive species die-outs, but the first to really be caused by us. And that's why Sea Shepherd, after all these years of doing campaigns to stop sealing, to stop whaling, is putting all of its focus into stopping illegal fishing, unreported fishing, and unregulated fishing. Because when we're facing this huge problem of overfishing, 15 to 40% of the global catch of fish is actually caught by these illegal, unreported, and unregulated so-called IUU operators. And so if we want to turn this tide of destruction facing the world's oceans, then surely a key way to doing that is getting rid of IUU fishing. Here's an issue where we already have the law on our side. What is missing is for somebody to enforce those laws. Because 90% of the world's fish are actually caught in the waters of countries where there actually is jurisdiction to stop these criminal operators, Sea Shepherd has teamed up with developing coastal and island states around the world, and in particular around the African continent, whereby we provide the ship, we provide the operating crew, we provide the fuel, and our government partner provides the law enforcement agents with the authority to board, inspect, and arrest vessels that are conducting illegal fishing or other fisheries crime. We're now working with the countries of the Gambia, Liberia, Benin, Sao Tome and Principe, Gabon, Namibia, and Tanzania. And working together with these countries, we've assisted them to arrest 52 vessels for illegal fishing and other fisheries crime. And for me, every single one of these illegal fishing vessels shut down is an illegal slaughterhouse that's been shut down. Every single day that one of these vessels spends detained in port as they're facing criminal prosecution is countless lives saved. Our ships, since March of this year, when the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, our ships have been in self-quarantine. And that's a decision that the Sea Shepherd board took on the advice of our medical advisors and also in solidarity with healthcare professionals around the world, as we in solidarity sought to flatten the curve. But for the past months, we've actually been able to prepare the ship.
Hold on there.
Sorry, we have a issue. Okay, testing 1, 2, 3, and we are back. Sorry about that, a little technical snafu, but to be expected as we're calling in here from several time zones. With COVID-19, when the World Health Organization declared it as a pandemic, Sea Shepherd's board took the decision to self-quarantine our ships. We did that for the safety of our crews. We did that for the safety of our government partners. And we also did that in solidarity with healthcare professionals around the world as we sought to flatten the curve so that hospitals and other medical facilities weren't overwhelmed. The past 3 months in self-quarantine have been spent doing critical maintenance of the ships. The ships are in better condition than they've ever been before. This has not been wasted time. This has been time that we really needed to get the ships working optimally. And we've also been monitoring the effect of COVID-19 on the world's fisheries. It's said that the global fisheries impact has actually been reduced by about 10% since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, that the global fishing effort is just 90% of what it was at the start of the year. But at the same time, we suspect that there's an increase in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And that's in part because these at-sea patrols have ceased in a lot of parts of the world. Fisheries observer programs have been suspended in a lot of places in the world. And so as these controlling mechanisms have been removed, illegal operators are becoming more brazen than ever. And we received reports from our partner countries that poachers are taking this opportunity to go into restricted areas, to go into marine parks, and take advantage of the waters of governments that are occupied in dealing with this whole health pandemic. Just over a week ago, the Sea Shepherd ships Sam Simon and Bob Barker left port. They're heading back to the waters off the African continent. We can't say specifically where they're going because we need that element of surprise to be able to catch these poachers in the act. But we are heading out to sea. And that is thanks to the tremendous work of our staff, crew, and volunteers. It's thanks to the generosity of our donors, people like Philip and Phil Wollen, who have contributed towards putting fuel in our tanks. But we now that the ships have set sail, we need to raise the money to keep them at sea. And that's why Philip Wollen has so generously offered to match any donations that are made today. And so if you're able to support us, I know the financial situation around the world is difficult, and then therefore I'm feeling humbled really asking. But we have to remember that as we're struggling with this pandemic, the poachers really don't rest. And criminal operators are taking advantage of the law enforcement vacuum that exists at sea to be able to ramp up their criminal enterprises. And we really need to meet force with force by having a presence at sea. So if you're able to donate today, you can donate here on this link. You can donate on Facebook. You can donate on our website. Phil Wollen has generously offered to match any donation. We'll be hearing from him a little bit later tonight. But first, we want to show you a quick little video that introduces you to the campaigns that we'll be undertaking in just a week or two.
The oceans are dying in our time. By 2047, all our fisheries will be dead, the lungs and the arteries of the earth. Trawlers are going up and down these waters, cleaning out the oceans, and those fish are going to wealthy countries. But here at Sea Shepherd, particularly out here on these campaigns, we say, yes, a catastrophe is coming, but we will stop it. I'm in West Africa, on the West African coast, on the Bycatch ship, with a wonderful Sea Shepherd crew. When there is a problem, the Sea Shepherd ships are the first to respond, because they have a team of young, energetic, smart, courageous young people willing to put themselves on the line to protect the most precious of all things. So that is why I support Sea Shepherd so strongly. Part of this trip has opened my eyes to another need. We need our campaigns to be increased. Therefore, I'm going to be providing a matching grant. So I welcome you all to a battle in a war that decency cannot afford to lose.
I hope you're as excited about these upcoming campaigns as I am. One of the successes that I think about often in regards to these West African campaigns is a couple of years ago, we were able to assist the Liberian Coast Guard to arrest a ship called the Libico II. This was an internationally blacklisted vessel that, on boarding, the Liberian Coast Guard, assisted by Sea Shepherd, discovered that this vessel had a secret shark liver oil production facility or plant on board. This one single ship was killing 250,000 sharks every 6 months and has not been operating since this arrest was made. And that means that thanks to the actions of the Liberian Coast Guard, supported by Sea Shepherd crews, supported by all of you, over 1 million sharks have been saved to date. Those are the kind of successes that our campaigns in West Africa are able to deliver. Another success was a ship in Tanzania that was arrested for shark finning offenses. That vessel was forfeited to the state of Tanzania. It has not been able to kill another shark or another tuna since then. The captain, the owner, and the agent were sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, a strong message to any other potential poachers that wanted to violate the waters of Tanzania. But we're living in a very different world situation now, one where governments have their hands full with COVID-19, this world pandemic. And that's why our crews, supported by our generous donors, people like Philip and Trix Wollen, have been working tirelessly to get the ships back out at sea. And finally, after 3 months of hard work, the Bob Barker and the Sam Simon are at sea on their way to the African continent to resume operations with government partners to take out these poachers, to essentially turn back this tide of destruction. Joining me from Melbourne tonight, I have a dear, dear friend of mine, Philip Wollen. Philip is family to me. I've had the great privilege of knowing Philip since 2003, when as a young 21-year-old, I spent a couple of months actually living with Philip and Trix in Melbourne as the Farley Moat, as Sea Shepherd ship at the time, was gearing up for one of the campaigns down in the Antarctic to stop whaling in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary. And in that time, we've become very, very close. Philip and Trix have been major donors in every single Antarctic whale defense campaign that we've ever done. Those are campaigns that together saved over 6,000 whales that in a very direct way were saved thanks to the generosity of Philip and Trix. Philip is a former vice president of Citibank. Together with Phil Wollen, they support over 500 projects around the world, from animal shelters in India to orphanages to hospitals to the arts to animal projects all over the world. One of their great projects that I had the incredible privilege of experiencing firsthand was called Kindness House in Melbourne. Because of the time zones, a lot of you might be joining us from Australia and from Melbourne. If so, you know about the great work that Philip and Trix have done. But they essentially provided Sea Shepherd Australia with its first office ever on the Australian continent. And that's what really helped allow the growth of Sea Shepherd that we see today. I had the great privilege of seeing firsthand their projects in India, visiting the orphanages, visiting the animal shelters. And one of the things that I admire so much about Philip is that he has a calculus in how he determines where to donate. He wants to donate to causes where he can see direct lives saved, where he can get the most conservation bang for his buck. And I genuinely believe that that's why he's decided to contribute to these campaigns, because these West African campaigns are campaigns where we can save countless of marine creatures. Another thing that I really admire about Philip is his ability to draw on thinking from great philosophers, from both modern and classical literature, and also from his own experiences, especially from his own experiences in communicating and speaking for the voiceless animals that cannot speak for themselves. And I've had the great honor of sharing some of those experiences with Philip, including joining him at sea on board the Bob Barker on patrol in the Gambia in January earlier this year. And Philip was on board the Bob Barker going out in the ribs and was a part of a really big victory when we assisted the Gambian Navy to arrest a vessel that had 54 shark and ray fins drying on their monkey deck. This was a vessel that was arrested by the Gambian Navy, by the Gambian Fisheries Authority, and escorted back to Banjul for prosecution. A success that would not have been possible thanks to Philip. And so without any further delay, and for the person you really signed on to listen to, I've been speaking for way too long now, I'd like to introduce Philip Wollen. Philip, you're joining us from Melbourne.
Hi, Peter. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm sure that our viewers have many questions for you. I've got some questions of my own, so we'll jump into those. You and Trix support projects all around the world, and yet oceans have been a major focus of your charitable giving. And so I wanted to ask you, why do ocean issues receive so much of your attention? And maybe you can speak about the state of the oceans and why it's important to care for the seas, and ultimately what's the impact of illegal fishing and overfishing on the oceans, on marine wildlife, and ultimately on us.
Well, Peter, I didn't start off thinking about the oceans at all in the early days. I've been doing this for 30 years. I concentrated largely on building things, building schools, clinics, shelters, sanctuaries for children and animals and the terminally ill. And then in 2003, I got involved with Sea Shepherd. Probably one of the most seminal events of my life, and the most productive of my times of my life have been since then. And I realized that a lot of my friends and people in the community knew about my projects on land. They'd been out there to see the projects, met the people who run them, met all the animals, and they discovered what a high degree of egregious cruelty exists caused by human beings on the animal kingdom. But they knew nothing about the oceans, because in the oceans, out of sight is out of mind. And it's only when I started delving deeper into this subject that I realized that really ought to be one of our key points of focus going forward. Then I read the book by Richard Ellis, Empty Ocean, and I got to tell you, that absolutely terrified me. We are living in very tricky times. So I look at the big picture now. In human history, only 100 billion human beings have ever lived. 7.5 billion people are alive today. And we humans torture and kill 2 billion sentient, living, loving animals every week. We stab and suffocate 1 billion ocean animals every 8 hours. If human beings were killed at the same rate, we'd be wiped out in one weekend. 10,000 entire species are wiped out every year because of the actions of one, and we now face the 6th mass extinction in cosmological history. This is an existential threat. By 2048, all our fisheries will be dead, and they're the lungs and the arteries of the earth. Vegetarian cows now consume more fish than whales and all the big animals in the sea. So I think it's very important for people to understand that the importance of the oceans. And more importantly, I think you only realize the impact after the event. I think that's where Sea Shepherd, I can actually say things about Sea Shepherd that you can't. Let me tell you, with 500 in 40 countries and been doing it for 30 years, I've met a lot of people and I've seen a lot of projects. And there is no organization on the planet like Sea Shepherd. And you can put that in the bank. There is no other organization like it. So the problem with the oceans, and I'm sorry to belabor the point, is that because it's invisible, people thought it was a bottomless pit. I remember that line from Ernest Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises. Bill asks Mike, "How did you go bankrupt?" And Mike replies, 2 ways, gradually, then suddenly. And that's what's going to happen in the oceans. You know, the Pacific Gyre right now is so full of plastic junk and human feces, it's created a floating footprint bigger than India. So the plastic, we've made a film in India called The Plastic Cow. The damage that we're doing to our marine ecosystems is so horrendous, one cannot even begin to describe it. So that is why I think that it's so important for us to think much more strategically. You know, I remember when Sea Shepherd first came on the Farley Moa to Melbourne in about 2003-04, that ship was running on fumes. It was such a tiny little organization. You might have been 20 years old at the time. And I was absolutely gobsmacked. And we had about 30 crew members and a very, very tiny budget. And I've got so many great stories that one day I'm going to put down in print about my life with the Sea Shepherd organization. But now when you look at Sea Shepherd, it's a completely different animal. We've got about 13 or 14 ships on every piece of salt water you could possibly imagine. I've seen such a magnificent change in the organization. And I think, well, where are we going to be in the future? Remember, by 2048, all the fisheries are dead. So we're running out of time. So I think if we thought strategically, let's take, I think we should have at least 1 million supporters and members at Sea Shepherd. Now that's not a very big number, but 7 billion people on the planet. That's the same population as Jacksonville. You know, an Australian child gets more pocket money than 400 million people on the planet who work 7 days a week. Just donating a small fraction of every bit of pocket money that every kid gets would enable us to have 100 ships. That's $1,000 a year for 1 million people. That's $1 billion enterprise. And we should have these ships deployed on every ocean and as a resource for all these coastal countries to draw upon when needed. So I think that what you have done so brilliantly at Sea Shepherd is you've brought in the other countries who provide you with the jurisprudence, the systems of law, and to go out and affect and arrest these poachers. So I think we need a new form, if you like, of jurisprudence, you know, a foro conscientiae, a court of the conscience, so that countries all around the world work together to sign memos of understanding with you guys so you can do things that they can't. So I have unimaginable respect for everything that Sea Shepherd has done. I remember Admiral Denny McGinn saying that we have learned that nations will raid and invade, long before they starve. Now, these coastal communities with artisanal fishers, if their livelihood is taken away, and it is being taken away without your involvement, these people will starve. And we face a geopolitical threat that we can't even begin to imagine. That's why I think the oceans are so important today.
Thank you very much for that, Phil. It's an incredible endorsement coming from you. One of the things I've always appreciated about your strategy is that you've always had a very holistic approach to dealing with issues. And I know that's one of the reasons that you've promoted veganism. You often point out to veganism as being the solution for our health problems, for environmental problems, for cruelty problems. And I see that with our illegal fishing campaigns. By doing these campaigns, we're protecting marine protected areas, these critical areas of biodiversity. We're ensuring that these regulations aren't just paper tigers. We're giving those regulations fight. We're saving more animals and more marine creatures than we've ever saved before in the history of Sea Shepherd, because every vessel arrested is tens of thousands of lives saved every day that they're in detention. And we're also defending the livelihoods of local, small-scale, artisanal fishermen, people whose livelihoods are at risk by these trawlers coming into marine protected areas and absolutely wreaking havoc. And so we're working on animal issues, environmental issues, social justice issues, all in one campaign. And I think that makes it really, really powerful, because there's something in that campaign that speaks to everybody. And there's our volunteers come from broad churches, a background, and there's something in our campaigns that appeals to everybody. And you've certainly spent a lot of time on board our ships, met a lot of the crews, and I know that the Sea Shepherd have a very special place in your heart. And so I wanted to ask you, what is it that you find special about Sea Shepherd volunteers, Sea Shepherd supporters, and the crews on board our ships?
I'm captivated by the amount of energy that exists, not just on board the ships, but with the volunteers and the donors and the people who take such a vital interest in everything that Sea Shepherd does. If there is a mantra, and I think I've said it to you on the plane, the thing I love so much about Sea Shepherd is that I see differentiations between Sea Shepherd and most of the other groups that we support around the world. Most groups will say, when they're talking to their major donors or to their constituency, they will say something like this: we can see disaster looming, and we want to tell the world about it. But as Sea Shepherd, we say, we see disaster looming, but we will stop it. Now that is a fundamental difference. And that kind of ethos, that kind of chemistry, those dynamics, the electricity, if you like, in everybody's bodies, pervades from everyone, right down from the guys running the organization, to the captains, to the officers, to the crews. This is not a game for them. This is serious. And it's contagious. Not only is the kindness that they show contagious, it's very infectious. Something crossed my mind when we were leaving the Bob Barker in the Gambia recently in the fast boat, and we had a new crew member. He didn't speak much English, and it was very early in the morning. We're heading back towards Banjul, and I noticed there were about 10, we passed about 10 small fish that were dead, obviously just thrown overboard. By this stage, all the poachers and all the fishing boats had gone. They'd scattered as soon as you guys had arrived. But there were some fish lying in the water. And I looked at this young man's face. First campaign, never done it before. And I saw the look of utter disgust on his face. Now I thought, with young crew members like that coming on board our ships in the future, this organization is in very safe hands. He felt it deep in his heart, the waste, the cruelty, the squalid nature of the industrial fishing complex. Now that was just a young man. I think he's 20 years old. So that's a good feeling.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Philip. I love your analogy with the alarm. It seems like a lot of organizations exist solely to sound the alarm. But for these ocean issues, the alarm was sounded long ago. When the alarm is sounded, that's when we go to our battle stations in a very literal sense. And we've been in those battle stations. We're on those battle stations every day, and our crews are heading back to those battle stations right now. And so for those of you who are joining us now, Philip Wollen has generously offered to match any donation that you're able to give. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic has been difficult for people across the world, certainly financially, and therefore Philip has generously offered to double the impact of the donations that you make today. So thank you so much for your continued generosity, Philip. You've been supporting us for almost 2 decades now, and really the successes that our crews are able to achieve at sea are only possible because of you and Trix, and because of all of you who are tuning in tonight and are able to donate to keep our ships on station at sea. And so, Philip, you, in January of this year, before COVID-19 even became declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization, you spent, I think it was almost 10 days on board the Bob Barker on patrol. You spent some time in the country of the Gambia. We traveled up the river together. You saw firsthand the impact of these campaigns to stop illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And I wanted to ask you, what you'd been supporting these campaigns for years before coming on to the Bob Barker in West Africa. And I wanted to ask, what was your impression of the campaign? How did it meet your expectations?
Peter, I really have to say that and you handled the whole matter with such elegance that you made every person in that room listen attentively to every word you said. I was absolutely captivated by it. And the other thing that I was so impressed by was the cruise. It's a veritable United Nations. They come from so many different parts of the world. Of course, we've always known that. I know the first ship we had, I knew every crew member. I used to spend every day on the ship for at least 2 months. I got to know them all. We'd have dinner 2 or 3 times a week. They'd come and spend weekends or days at our home. We'd do a Friday morning food drop. We'd pick them up at the airport, take them back at the end, take them to hospital or to the dentist or whenever they needed stuff like that. We knew them all very well, almost intimately. They became part of our extended family. I found that being with the new crew that I'd never met before, that within a day, I found that, I think Christopher Hitchens says it best, I would be happy to die in this man's company. These are the real deal. We are living in very challenging times, but we've got a new breed of activists, and so many of them are at Sea Shepherd. And the thing that I appreciated from them was that they realized so early that all the victories they'd had, by this stage, I think we'd had about 2 ships that you'd arrested in these last 3 or 4 years. And they realized that all these victories were actually conditional. We can never let up. We need to be always alert. I mean, you remember we had a big battle here in Australia to end the live animal exports, and we succeeded temporarily. Then we had a battle against the jumps racing industry, and we succeeded temporarily. We had a battle against greyhound racing, and we succeeded temporarily. And the same with bull racing. We succeeded temporarily. And of course, in Antarctica, Sea Shepherd and a whole lot of others, but Sea Shepherd was certainly the leader in the battle against the Japanese poachers. You guys won in The Hague, but they came back. to Antarctica, but they came back temporarily. This doesn't mean they've stopped whaling. But ultimately, I think the message I think I want not just Sea Shepherd, but all these activist groups to understand is that you can never drop your guard. Ultimately, these people all come back. They all come back. Vigilance really is the price we pay for liberty. I remember you and I discussing, I mentioned that Albert Camus wrote this masterful book called The Plague. And the Algerian town of Oran had a deadly plague of rats. And the entire town put aside all their differences to cooperate and eventually defeat the plague. And finally, life returned to normal. But sometimes, when the evening breeze comes in from the east, there's a faint, sickly stench, reminding the survivors that the rats are still down there hiding underground, waiting, reminding citizens not to be complacent. And most importantly, we're now living under a new world order, which will never go away. So this notion of eternal vigilance is extremely important. That is why I think we need to understand where Sea Shepherd needs to be in the next 15 years. We need to be so big and so powerful that we become a force of nature ourselves, acting on behalf of governments that can't do it themselves. So eternal vigilance. And sometimes people say, you know, your ambitions are too high. Remember that last line of Mark Antony's speech at Caesar's funeral? He tells Brutus, ambition should be made of sterner stuff. We need to be ambitious. I think Robert Browning said, if we aren't, what else is heaven for? A man's reach ought to exceed his grasp, or else what else is heaven for? So I think under these circumstances, we've got crews, officers, donors, we've got an infrastructure. You've built a very, very powerful brand right around the world. I think the best is yet to come, because I think Sea Shepherd and organizations like yours is our last and best chance of survival.
Thank you, Philip. Whenever I'm at sea, I often think of something you told me early on when we first met over 17 years ago now. And you taught me that within the animal advocacy movement, it's that our victories are always temporary and yet our defeats are permanent. And that's as true of animal advocacy as environmental conservation. And it's one of the reasons why we have to keep returning to the waters of our partner countries. It's not enough to just show up for a week or 2 weeks and help them arrest 1 or 2 ships. The real success is when the arrests stop. We're tremendously proud of having assisted these countries with these 52 arrests, but when the arrests stop, it means that we're really having an effect, because the patrols are having their deterrence effect. And we're actually able to prevent these vessels from even coming into these marine parks to begin with. So and I think that sums up really well why you've supported us for so long. And you've done it consistently, because it's about never letting up that pressure, because the minute that you do, nature abhors a vacuum and the poachers quickly mobilize to fill the void. And since you joined Sea Shepherd back in 2003, Philip, but at the start of Sea Shepherd's anti-whaling campaigns, you funded every single campaign that we did down in the Antarctic consistently. It's thanks to you and Trix, really, that we were able to save over 6,000 lives. And I was just wondering, having been along for the journey since the beginning of those anti-whaling campaigns, that so many of the people joining us here tonight know Sea Shepherd for, how has Sea Shepherd changed since you first started supporting Sea Shepherd? From the time you first stepped on board the Falling Moet when it came into the port of Melbourne, to spending time on the Bob Barker in the port of Banjul in the Gambia?
I think one of the most remarkable things that Sea Shepherd has accomplished is changing the paradigm, changing the way in which the world saw us. In those days, we were considered pirates and very colorful ones doing a good job, a very valuable job that governments couldn't do and wouldn't do. Today, Sea Shepherd are actually seen as a partner. I can remember if you and I were having dinner and we were discussing the old investment banking terminology of how do you actually grow an enterprise so that it becomes more successful. Well, if you are in a certain industry and you want to grow your company, there are three possible ways. You can build a bigger plant, you can build something, or you can buy something, you can take over a company and merge the two. So you can either build it or you can buy it. Alternatively, you can bond, where you do none of those things. You develop a relationship to work together in the same market, and you cooperate intelligently to achieve your joint ends. And that is what you've done. I don't even know if it went through your mind, but the moment I saw you talking, you were describing what you were going to do with Operation Icefish, sitting in our dining room. And I sat there silently listening to you, and I thought, this guy is actually developing relationships with countries in the future that will become his partners. They won't give Sea Shepherd any money, but they will give you the infrastructure to be able to stop illegal poaching. And that's exactly what you've done. 4 years later, look where you are. So to that extent, Sea Shepherd has changed remarkably. But it's also changed in another way that has been more difficult for me, because I've sort of lost touch, the personal touch that I had in the old days. I remember when the ship came in, I went to a little talk that Sea Shepherd gave at the Institute of Technology, and 40 people came. Only 40 people came, of which 18 were crew members. And there was you and Alex and Dustin and Gunter and Bertie and Paul Martin and a few others. And I sat in the audience and I thought, these are really lovely guys. And I got up and said, look, I'd like to say a few words to you fellas. Tonight I'll give you a present of $50,000 and I'll give you free offices in my building for as long as you like, 10 years, 20 years, whatever you like. And I'll run Sea Shepherd for you until you can get someone to do it properly. And that's what we did for a couple of years. Then Johnny Vassick came down and others did. And then happily we got Jeff Hansen. But we did boring things like, registering the organization, setting up bank accounts, trying to host a few fundraisers. Trix would do the laundry for the crew members, that kind of stuff. And of course, I still stay in touch with the people I just mentioned from all those years ago. And I've got so many wonderful stories that one day I will write down. But that's the downside. Now that Sea Shepherd's become so big, I looked at a part of a crew list the other day. I remember the days when Danny Vila used to run the crewing, and I thought I knew most of the people on the crew list. Now I haven't a clue. I don't even know 1% of them. And I got to admit, I feel lonely and I miss those days. But there you are.
Well, I don't think you need to feel lonely, Philip, because although you may not know everybody on the crew list, everybody on the crew certainly know you and Trix and the work that you do, and are so grateful for the opportunities to get onto the front line, to do real marine conservation work. And that's only possible thanks to you and Trix donating to us as generously as you do. And by all of you tuning in today, tonight, wherever you might be in the world, if you're able to donate today, then Philip has generously offered to double your donation by contributing towards this next campaign that we're launching in the waters of West Africa. We're going to help our government partners take back the seas from poachers who are exploiting the global pandemic of COVID-19 to fish illegally. And these are campaigns where to date, we've assisted our government partners to arrest 52 vessels for illegal fishing and other fisheries crimes. And with your continued support, we can really grow that ecological footprint, that patrolling footprint, and generate more successes for the oceans. And if you are able to donate, I promise you that we will do everything we can at sea to transform your generous donation into lives saved at sea. And Philip, because of your merchant banking background, I don't want to talk too much in terms of numbers, but at the same time, metrics really guide where you donate to. And you taught me in my early days with Sea Shepherd that you really cannot manage what you can't measure. And one of the things I was most impressed when I was trying to learn from you as to what groups you were supporting, you said, well, one of the reasons you've done so much work in India, for example, is that you get a lot of bang for your buck. It doesn't cost as much money to spay and neuter a dog or a cat in India as it would maybe in the Western world. And I think you have that same kind of feeling in terms of these illegal fishing campaigns, that this is, in terms of dollars translating into lives saved, you can get a really big bang for your buck here. And I was just hoping you could maybe give us a little bit of a rundown on that. How do people's donations today translate into lives saved at sea?
Peter, I think the best person to answer that question is actually you, but I know how much money was spent on the first ice fish campaign. All up, I think it might have been, I don't know, I'll have to tell you what my estimate is.
Sure.
I think it was about $1.5 million.
You're very close. It was 1.4.
Really? Okay. Just look what you've accomplished. I mean, that is mind-bogglingly brilliant. Now, if you're looking for something like a rate of return on capital employed, and your metric wasn't dollars and cents, but how many lives would be saved, just imagine that. Just look at not just the lives you saved on that campaign, but the fact of the matter is that the 5 bandits, that the worst ones, they wouldn't be fishing again. Many of those guys went to jail. Many of those guys have left the industry. And at least you stopped them for a few years. And we are talking about millions of lives. So the rate of return there is massive. And the other advantage that you guys discovered was that this kind of operation is scalable. You can double, triple, quadruple the size of your footprint simply by having more ships, more crew, more infrastructure. And there's only one impediment to that at the moment, and that is capital. And capital, once people realize the dire straits that we're in with the oceans, I have no doubt at all, human beings acting as individuals will see this as a maritime, a marine Marshall Plan. As individuals, they will contribute to an organization that is doing some things that governments can't or governments won't. So Paul Watson says, Sea Shepherd's not an organization, it's a movement. And in a sense, I agree. It is a movement. And I think there is now a new crop of young people coming through Sea Shepherd in their late 20s, early 20s to late 20s, who I think, and I see how well you're mentoring and training them. I think the future for activism, certainly at sea, is very bright, because you can take it from me, there is no organization out in the oceans like Sea Shepherd. There just isn't. You can put that in the bank. There just isn't. So if any donor wants to get real bang for their buck, deal with an organization that is highly ethical. All our ships are vegan. The way in which our officers treat our crews is exemplary. I would say that Sea Shepherd is the only game in town.
I'm so glad that you mentioned Operation Ice Fish, Philip, because I think it's a testament to what we really are able to do with a strategy in place, with tremendous focus, with the backing of our donors and supporters around the world. We shut down the most notorious illegal fishing vessel in the world, a ship called the Thunder, that no government could stop in the 10 years that it pillaged the Antarctic. And not only that, but this 110-day chase of this poaching vessel that ultimately led to the captain of this poacher sinking his own ship because he could not shake the pursuit of Sea Shepherd ships, led to government action around the world that saw the arrest of the Thunder's sister ships in places like Senegal and Malaysia, Indonesia, and Cabo Verde. And in just 2 years since the start of the Operation Icefish campaign, we were essentially able to shut down illegal fishing in the Antarctic. And if we could shut down illegal fishing in the Antarctic, then certainly we have a model going forward in terms of international collaborations, in terms of how we plan these campaigns to do so around the African continent. And then that's a model that we can expand to other parts of the world, to the South Pacific, to Latin America. I think we have a strategy that is working. And we just need to continue scaling it, as you so rightly say. We have a scalable model. And it's thanks to you and Trix and the people who are tuning in today or tonight, wherever you might be in the world, that we can hopefully continue to scale what we're doing, because we are making a difference.
Yes, Peter, just to take up that little point, at the time you were coming up with those strategies, it wasn't universally accepted as a good idea to stop taking on the Japanese in Antarctica. People thought that we were abdicating our core role. And now it took real courage to make those decisions. And as it turned out, if they were enlightened choices, very sage decisions. When I was on the Bob with you, I'd spend a lot of time on the bridge, and at night I'd sit on the stern deck and just watch the stars and the moon go over. It was a lovely experience. And I think that's experience in running organizations, that experience is like the stern lights on a ship. It only illuminates the path we've already sailed over. You might remember, I'm sure you do, Hegel explaining about the wise owls of Minerva. The wise owls are very intelligent animals, but you only hear the beating of their wings at dusk, after the end of the day. That really means we understand something only after reflecting upon it, long after the events have already occurred. We reflect and we cogitate and revisit and analyze it. So I think at the time it was a courageous decision, but now when we look back, like looking at the stern lights of the ship, what an enlightened decision that was. And that's one of the things that Peters and Waterman did in Search of Excellence. He said, the most successful companies are the ones that indulge in the most experiments. And that's one thing Sea Shepherd does. We are always looking for new ideas. The debris program in Australia, for example, is very successful. And so indeed is the Africa campaign. And it's not going to stop there. If my dream is realized, hopefully in my lifetime, when we have 100 suitable vessels, not as big as the ones we've got, scattered all around the globe, I think that would be a wonderful outcome, because that would ensure we have a fighting chance of protecting the oceans. And I think that when that day dawns, civilization will owe you a debt of gratitude it could never repay.
I think that brings us full circle perfectly, Philip, because both you and I joined Sea Shepherd because of the issue of whaling. And we're both tremendously proud that the actions down in the Southern Ocean, supported by people all over the world, especially in Australia, resulted in the end of whaling down in the Southern Ocean, that over 6,000 whales were saved. And yet we're reminded that whaling is not the biggest issue facing the survival of the world's oceans. Whaling is symptomatic of a more problematic relationship that we have with the oceans. And while I'm so proud of the 6,000 whales that we saved in 10 years of Antarctic whale defense campaigns, the reality is that over 300,000 whales and dolphins are being killed every single year as bycatch of the industrial fisheries. And so although Sea Shepherd was started really as a Save the Whales, Save the Seals organization, by necessity, we have grown into a Save the Oceans movement.
Right.
And so,
that's absolutely right, Peter. One of the things that I think that Sea Shepherd's doing so well is also encouraging governments to look at introducing new forms of legislation to try and protect their own waters. Laws are very, very important, and only strong laws will help. But there's no point having a strong law without strong enforcement. And that's where Sea Shepherd comes in, by providing a platform that takes the law out into these bad lands, off the coast where no one ever sees the crimes that are being committed against these powerless animals, and to the oceans. So the law is absolutely critically important. I'm actually reminded of Judge White's closing words in The Bonfire of the Vanities. He said, the law is humanity's first attempt at decency. So that is why I say to all the people watching and all our potential donors to Sea Shepherd, decency is actually the key. And I ask you all to join Sea Shepherd in a battle, in a war that decency cannot afford to lose. Because in the end, only three things matter: how deeply you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things that were not meant for you. Sitting passively and not helping the cause is not meant for you. So that is the message I'd like to leave everyone who's watching today.
Thank you so much, Philip. That's a perfect note to end on. For those of you who have joined us tonight, Philip and his wife Trix have offered to match any donation that you make tonight, and that'll allow our ships that have left port are now back en route to the waters off the coast of West Africa to plug a law enforcement void that exists in the age of COVID-19. And if you can donate today generously, then I promise you that our captains and crews will do their utmost to transform those generous donations into lives saved. Thank you for joining us tonight, Philip. I think we can open up for a couple of questions.
Peter, I would just like to say something that I've been saying for so many years, if I may. Every year when the Sea Shepherd ships used to leave Melbourne to go to Antarctica, they'd ask me to say a few words to the crews and to all the guests who would show up. So I'll leave you with the words I used to say to the crews. These are the words that my mother used to read to me when I was a little boy. Christopher Robin is reading to Winnie the Pooh. If ever there is a tomorrow when we're not together, there is something you must always remember. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, smarter than you think, but most importantly, even if we're apart, I'll always be with you. So thank you for having me on tonight.
Thank you, Philip. We have Lucas Eriksson is on the call. He's our IT guru, calling in from Denmark. Lucas, if you have a couple of questions from any of our viewers, we can we'll be happy to answer those and then call it a night or a day or wherever you might be.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our stream again. We do have a few questions both for you, Phil, and for you, Peter. And I'll just start with one for Phil here. Jason asks, Phil, do you believe that Sea Shepherd will achieve to stop all whaling around the world once and for all?
I haven't any doubt whatsoever. One day, when that ignoble practice is confined to the garbage dump of history, Sea Shepherd's fingerprints will be on every single page. That day will happen, and Sea Shepherd would play a significant and tangible role in their demise. I haven't any doubt whatsoever.
Nice. All right, and we have another person here asking, hello, Phil, what is the biggest threat to the oceans in your opinion?
I think ultimately it boils down to this puny biped with a reptilian brain called a human being. That is the greatest threat. A greedy biped, a voracious appetite, reckless, destructive, with a very short attention span. We are the greatest threat. And the detritus that exists in the ocean, the plastic and junk. I don't know if anyone here has ever been to Henderson Island, but it's impossible to actually take one step without stepping on plastic, junk, syringes, wire, car batteries, or lawn furniture. I don't know how many of you folks have seen Carl Sagan's beautiful picture of space taken from the Voyager spacecraft. A tiny little speck, and he called it our pale blue dot suspended on a sunbeam. What a captivating image that is. Well, today, our planet Earth, our beautiful pale blue dot, 35% of the biomass of all land animals is human. 61% of it are non-human animals in slaughterhouses awaiting death. A minuscule 4% is what is left over for animals living wildly. 70% of all the birds on this planet are in cages awaiting slaughter. We human beings have turned Carl Sagan's beautiful pale blue dot into blood-stained planet slaughterhouse. I've seen the virus, I've seen the problem. It's us. Now, there's still time for us on this so-called road to Damascus to change our ways, but time is running out.
Thank you very much, Phil. We have a question here for you, Peter, if you don't mind. Sketch Away on YouTube asks, does Sea Shepherd also work towards ending overfishing, for example, of tuna, or is fighting poaching of currently endangered animals the main goal?
One of the things that's been amazing with our government partnerships is that we've actually been able to assist our partners in strengthening the laws and regulations in their countries as well. So after Operation Albacore started in Gabon 4 years ago, the president of Gabon passed a decree establishing the largest network of marine protected areas in Africa, protecting 26% of the waters of Gabon. Sea Shepherd's legal division is now working with the government of Gabon to establish Africa's first shark sanctuary. And not only are we assisting countries in bringing about greater protections for the marine environments, but we're also contributing the enforcement capacity to ensure, again, that these regulations, these laws are not just paper tigers. We're coming with the bite. In the waters of these countries, when we talk about illegal fishing, we talk about IUU fishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Illegal fishing is vessels coming into the waters of a country, fishing without a license, fishing in a marine protected area or a restricted zone, maybe using prohibited fishing gear. But unreported fishing is often associated with overfishing. Unreported fishing is vessels that are legally licensed, but they're either underreporting what they're catching, or they're misreporting what they're catching, or they're not reporting the bycatch, the collateral damage of their fishing effort. And that's a huge part of the overfishing problem. And what we've seen in places like Gabon is by having a patrolling presence at sea, we're able to greatly deter the unreported side of fishing. And so on the one hand, we're assisting the countries to arrest illegal vessels. On the other hand, we're also assisting them to see firsthand by bringing their law enforcement to the scene of the crime, by bringing them to the area of the fishing operations that are legal. They can see exactly the amount of fish that's being taken out of their seas. And that's led to radical transformations in fisheries laws and regulations and fisheries agreements. And it's also the images that are captured from these campaigns lead to greater public understanding of the impact of consumer choices.
Thank you for that. Another one here for you, Phil. Simone asks, hey Phil, Peter said that you are vegan. What's the main reason for this, and how did you get there?
Right. Yes, thank you for that question. As Peter mentioned, I used to be an investment banker, and at a time when my favorite food was filet mignon and lobster, a fact for which I am so profoundly ashamed today. And then one day I was sent out on a mandate to advise a large conglomerate company, and they had interests in many different industries. And one of the industries they had a large factory for turned out to be a slaughterhouse. And what I saw that day absolutely terrified me. It affected me so profoundly. I was a mess at the end of the day. And I became vegetarian on the spot. But I didn't actually know enough to to make any intelligent conclusions. But shortly thereafter, I was on a business trip to India, and I was on the street and I saw a dairyman dragging his injured cow to the slaughterhouse. The cow had been hit by a lorry and had broken her spine, and she was in absolute agony. To get her to move, he was throwing chili powder into her eyes and shoving sharp objects up her anus. And alongside her walked her starving, bedraggled, scrawny, skinny calf. Well, he got her to the slaughterhouse gates, and before he handed her over to the butcher, the bastard milked her. So even at the last moment of her life, she was still being abused by human beings. Now, if that doesn't change the heart of a man, nothing will. So I came back home and I studied the dairy industry, and I concluded that it is every bit as egregious as any other part of the meat industry. In fact, dairy is meat in liquid form. And that is when I became vegan. So my shoes, my belt, my watch band, my diet, none of them have any animal products in them at all. I've never felt better, and at least now I can look in the mirror every morning without feeling profoundly ashamed.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Phil. We have two more questions until we're going to end here. Thomas is asking, "Hey Phil, have yourself or any of your projects been affected by COVID?"
Yes, sir, they have indeed. Some shelters, for example, have between 3,000 and 5,000 animals, may have 200 to 300 staff. I'm talking about some in India, for example, some in Africa. But let's talk about India briefly. The shelter staff can't get to work. They're stuck at home. So it's almost impossible to get vets and shelter staff to come to the shelters. So the animals are in dire straits, getting medication, fodder, the water truck to arrive, the dog catching vans to go out and catch the dogs, the spay-neuter programs. The para-vets who look after the animals on site are not able to get to work. Even pet shops, for example, pets are just left in the shop to fend for themselves. And it's a disaster. And many of the poor day laborers that we employ on some of the larger projects have had to walk back to their villages. And sometimes they're walking 400 kilometers back to their village with no money and no food. And I can't tell you how many people have committed suicide at the side of the road. So it's affecting us in ways that we never even thought possible. And it's a tragedy that will linger, I think, for years and years to come.
Thank you for that, Phil. We have one last question here. This one is for you, Peter. I believe you know this person. Captain Alex Cornelissen is asking, when are we going to do a campaign together again, Peter? 2 ships, 2 captains?
That would be amazing. For those of you who don't know, I sailed under Captain Paul Watson's command for many years. I then subsequently sailed under the command of Captain Alex Cornelissen. I was his first mate for many years. It would be great to do a campaign together with you, Alex, 2 ships side by side, you at the helm of one and me at the helm of another. And I think with the generous support of our donors, we can continue to expand our patrolling footprint around the continent of Africa, and that greatly increases our chances of getting more ships and a greater ability to do that campaign together. But I would certainly love to serve side by side with you again.
All right, I think that was it for the questions, and you're welcome to close off here, Peter.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone who's joined us. I know we're across many time zones here, from Los Angeles to Melbourne to Copenhagen, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all of you for joining us tonight. If you're able to donate, Philip and Trix Wollen have generously offered to double the impact of that donation by matching it. The Sea Shepherd ships are out at sea now. The Bob Barker and Sam Simon are on their way to the continent of Africa. And it's thanks to the hard work that Sea Shepherd crews, volunteers, staff, and all of you have put into getting the ships to that point. With your support, we can have a huge impact in these patrols, in shutting down criminal operations, in saving marine wildlife. And I just wanted to thank you for your continued support. And Philip, thank you so much for standing with us for so long. I really enjoyed the opportunity to sail with you in January. And on the other side of COVID-19, I hope that you, Trix, and I have the opportunity to sail together onto the front lines of marine conservation once again. Sending you lots of love to Melbourne here from Los Angeles. It's been really, really nice sharing this screen with you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Lucas. Good night.